crack of a whip, thin and sharp as a shard of glass, cut through the oppressive heat of the New Mexico canyon. Jedediah Stone reined in his weary mare, Dust Devil, his hand instinctively going to the Winchester resting in its saddle scabbard. He'd been tracking a stray calf for 2 days, and this was not the sound of lost livestock. It was the sound of human cruelty. He dismounted, his worn boots making no sound on the packed red earth. Leaving the mare tied to a gnarled juniper, he crept forward, low and silent, his body a tense line of wiry muscle. He peered over a sun-baked rock outcropping, and his blood ran cold. 2 men, their faces flushed with sun and cheap whiskey, stood over a figure kneeling in the dust. They were prospectors by the look of them, their clothes stained with grime and greed. The figure on the ground was a young woman, her hands bound tight behind her back. Her dress, a thing of fine woven wool in patterns of crimson and black, was torn at the shoulder, revealing a welt already rising on her copper skin. Her long black hair was a river of silk spilling into the dirt, but her head was held high, her back straight as a spear shaft. She was Navajo. Dying? And she stared at her captors with a defiance that burned brighter than the midday sun. "Maybe this'll loosen your tongue, princess," one of the men sneered, his voice a gravelly rasp. He uncoiled the whip again. "Tell us where the silver is. Your people know these mountains." She said nothing. Her silence was her shield and her weapon. The second man, a hulking brute with a matted beard, laughed. "She's a stubborn one, Silas. Maybe she needs a different kind of persuading." He took a menacing step toward her. Jed's world narrowed to the space between his rifle's sight and the man's chest. He had 3 children at home, a boy of 12, a girl of 8, and a little one just turned 5. He had a ranch that was more dust than grass, and a heart that was more scar tissue than muscle, since Martha had been taken by the fever. He had no room in his life for this kind of trouble, but he also had a spine, and it wouldn't let him right away. He cocked the Winchester. The sound, a sharp double click, echoed in the canyon's silence. Both men froze, spinning around. Their hands flew to the pistols holstered at their hips. "That's far enough." Jed's voice was low and steady, carrying the weight of the heat and the land itself. He stepped out from behind the rock, the rifle held easy but ready at his shoulder. "Let the woman go." The one called Silas squinted, a venomous smile twisting his lips. "Well, look what we have here. A lone rancher playing hero. This ain't your concern, friend. Ride on. When a man raises a whip to a woman, bound or not, it becomes the concern of any man worth the name," Jed said, his eyes never leaving them. "I said let her go." The hulking man drew his pistol. "You're outnumbered, old man." Jed didn't flinch. His gaze was as hard and unyielding as the rock behind him. "I only need 1 bullet for you, the second for your friend. My rifle is faster than your draw, and I promise you, I don't miss. Now cut her loose." A tense silence descended, thick and suffocating. The only sound was the buzz of a fly and the ragged breathing of the 2 prospectors. They looked at each other, a flicker of doubt in their eyes. They saw no fear in Jedediah Stone, only a cold, hard certainty. He was a man who lived on the edge of the Dying Baikea, the Navajo land. He knew the cost of things. Finally, Silas spat on the ground. "She ain't worth dying over." He pulled a knife from his belt and roughly sawed through the ropes binding the woman's wrists. He shoved her forward and she stumbled, catching herself with a grace that defied her ordeal. "Now get," Jed ordered, his rifle still aimed. "Leave your horses. You can walk back to whatever hole you crawled out of. Consider it a tax for your poor manners." Cursing, the men threw their guns to the ground and backed away, their hands raised. Jed watched them until they were small figures scrambling up the far side of the canyon. Only then did he lower the rifle. He turned his attention to the woman. She had risen to her full height, her gaze fixed on him. It was not a look of gratitude. It was a look of intense, wary appraisal. Her eyes were dark, fathomless pools holding storms of pride and pain. She rubbed her chafed wrists, her chin held at a regal angle. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked, his voice softer now. She did not answer. She simply watched him. A captive hawk trying to decide if its new cage was any better than the last. Jed understood. He was a white man, a Bilagana. To her, he was just a different kind of threat. "My ranch is a half-day's ride from here," he said, gesturing vaguely to the north. "You can have food, water. My children are there. You'll be safe." Her eyes flickered at the mention of children, the first crack in her stoic facade. Still, she remained silent. Jed sighed, running a hand through his dusty hair. Look, I mean you no harm, but you can't stay here. Those men, they might come back, and your people, they'll be looking for you. At the mention of her people, a fire ignited in her gaze. She took a step, then another, her eyes scanning the horizon, a deep primal longing in her posture. She looked back at Jed, then at the vast, unforgiving landscape. She knew as well as he did that alone, without a horse or water, she wouldn't last a day. He saw the war in her, the pride fighting against the practical need for survival. He took a step back, giving her space. My name is Jedediah Stone. I give you my word I will not harm you. I will help you get back to your family. She studied his face for a long moment, searching for the lie. She saw the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the sorrow that clung to him like dust. But she saw no deceit. With a slow, deliberate nod, she gave her assent. It was not a surrender, but an agreement, a temporary truce in a war she had been fighting all her life. The ride back to the ranch was a silent one. Jed had given her the reins to Dust Devil, and he walked alongside, the Winchester held in the crook of his arm. The woman, he still didn't know her name, rode with a natural, easy posture that spoke of a life spent on horseback. She never looked at him, her gaze fixed on the distant mesas that shimmered in the heat. Jed's mind churned. He'd just invited a hornet's nest into his home. If her people found her at his ranch, they wouldn't stop to ask questions. They would see a white man with a missing dying woman and assume the worst. Arrows would fly first. Explanations, if they came at all, would come later. But leaving her was not an option. He couldn't have her death on his conscience. A conscience already burdened by the loss of his Martha. As the sun began to dip low, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple, the small cluster of buildings that was his ranch came into view. A simple log house, a sturdy barn, and a chicken coop, all huddled together in a shallow valley beside a creek that was more sand than water this time of year. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, a welcome sight. 3 small figures exploded from the house, racing toward them. "Pa! Pa, you're back!" 12-year-old Caleb shouted, his long legs eating up the ground. He was a lanky boy, all knees and elbows, with his father's serious eyes. 8-year-old Sarah was close behind, her blonde braids flying. "Did you find Rosebud?" And toddling in their wake was 5-year-old Leo, his chubby face a mask of concentration as he tried to keep up. They all skidded to a halt as they saw the woman on the horse. Their boisterous welcome died in their throats, replaced by wide-eyed curiosity and a touch of fear. Jed put a reassuring hand on Caleb's shoulder. "It's all right, son. Rosebud will have to wait. This is a guest." The woman slid from the horse with fluid grace. She stood before the children, her regal bearing undiminished. Her dark eyes softened almost imperceptibly as she looked at them, especially at little Leo, who peeked at her from behind Jed's leg. "Go on inside, all of you," Jed said gently. Sarah fetched some water from the basin and a clean cloth. Sarah nodded, her gaze still fixed on the stranger, and darted back to the house. Caleb hesitated, his eyes full of questions. "Caleb, take Dust Devil to the barn, rub her down and give her some oats. She's had a long day," Jed instructed. It was a man's job, and it made Caleb puff out his chest with a sense of responsibility. He took the reins and led the mare away, casting one last curious look over his shoulder. Jed led the woman to the porch. He gestured to a simple wooden bench. "Please." She sat, her back ramrod straight. Sarah reappeared with a bowl of water and a strip of clean linen. She placed them on the porch beside the woman and then scurried back to the safety of the doorway, watching. The woman dipped the cloth in the water and began to gently clean the dust and grime from her face and arms. When she came to the welt on her shoulder, she flinched, a sharp intake of breath the only sound she made. Jed went inside. The cabin was a single large room, clean but spare. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a small kitchen area to one side and sleeping cots on the other. A large quilt, Martha's last finished piece, hung on the wall, its vibrant colors a stark contrast to the plain log walls. He found the tin of salve he used for rope burns and animal bites. When he came back out, he held it out to her. This might help. She looked at the tin, then up at him. For the first time, she spoke. Her voice was low and melodic, like the sound of water running over smooth stones. "Ahi," she said. "Thank you." She took the tin, her fingers brushing his. The touch was brief, fleeting, but it sent a strange jolt through him. She applied the salve to her shoulder, her movements precise and economical. The sun had vanished, leaving a bruised twilight in its wake. The sounds of the coming night began to rise, the chirp of crickets, the distant howl of a coyote. "My name is Tala," she said, her voice quiet but clear in the still air. "Tala?" Jed repeated. It was a beautiful name. "It's a pleasure to meet you, despite the circumstances." She looked at him, her dark eyes seeming to see right through him, to the lonely, hollow places inside. "You have put yourself in great danger, Jedediah Stone." "I'm aware," he said, his voice grim. "My father is a chief. His name is Nata'ani. He will have warriors searching. When they find my trail leading here, they will not be happy." "I figured as much," Jed said, leaning against the porch rail. He looked out at the darkening land that bordered the dying nation. "But you are not safe out there. Here, at least, there are walls." "Walls will not stop them if they believe you are my enemy," Tala stated. "Not as a threat, but as a simple, undeniable fact." "Then we will have to convince them I am not," he said. The words sounded brave, but a knot of dread was tightening in his stomach. He looked back at the doorway where his children's silhouettes were clustered. He had invited the storm to his door, and now all he could do was pray he could protect his family from the lightning. The evening passed in a strained quiet. Sarah, overcoming her initial shyness, offered Tala a bowl of the thin stew Jed had left simmering over the fire. Tala accepted it with another soft "ah-hee" and ate with a quiet dignity that made the humble meal feel like a banquet. She was watchful, her eyes missing nothing, the way Caleb took care to make sure Leo's spoon found his mouth, the way Sarah hummed a little tune as she cleared the wooden plates, the way Jed's gaze would often drift to the colorful quilt on the wall, a sadness clouding his features. After the children were settled in their cots, Jed offered Tala a bedroll by the hearth. It was the warmest spot in the house. "You should get some rest," he said. She nodded, but her eyes were drawn to the window, to the vast star-dusted darkness outside. "They will ride through the night," she said. "They will not rest." Jed knew she was right. He pulled a chair over to the window, the Winchester laid across his lap. "Then I won't either." He sat through the long hours, watching the moon-drenched landscape. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like the whisper of approaching moccasins. He thought of his children, sleeping so trustingly just a few feet away. He had promised to keep them safe after Martha died, and now his actions had put them in the path of a danger he couldn't rightly measure. Tala did not sleep either. She sat by the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on her proud, still face. She was like a creature of the wild brought indoors, beautiful and untamed, her presence filling the small cabin with a potent, unfamiliar energy. Some time before dawn, he must have drifted off, his head slumping against the window frame. He was awoken by a gentle touch on his shoulder. He snapped awake, the rifle coming up in a single, fluid motion. Tala stood over him, her hand withdrawn. There was no fear in her eyes, only a quiet understanding. "The sun rises," she said. Jed lowered the rifle, a flush of embarrassment on his face. He looked out the window. The eastern sky was bleeding with the first pale light of dawn. The land was still, empty. "Nothing," he breathed, a sigh of relief. "They are close," Tala said, her voice certain. "I can feel them. Like a coming storm, you can feel the air change before the first drop of rain." Her words sent a chill down his spine. He stood up, his joints aching from the long vigil. "Caleb," he called softly. The boy was instantly awake. "Yes, Pa? I need you to take Sarah and Leo to the root cellar. Take water and the last of the bread. Stay there. Do not come out, no matter what you hear. You understand me?" Caleb's eyes widened, but he didn't question the order. He knew the tone in his father's voice. He nodded grimly, his face pale in the dim light. He gently woke his sister, whispering in her ear. Sarah, in turn, scooped a still-sleeping Leo from his cot. Without a word, they slipped out the back door and disappeared around the side of the house, toward the heavy wooden doors of the cellar. Jed barred the front door, a heavy beam of oak that slid into iron brackets. He checked the loads in his Winchester and the Colt Peacemaker at his hip. He moved to the window, peering out at the horizon. Tala stood beside him. "They will not listen to your words, Jedediah Stone. They will see you, a white man, and me, here. They will see a cage. Then you'll have to be the one to talk to them," he said, his voice tight. "When they get close enough, you'll have to make them understand." "And if they do not?" she asked, her gaze steady on his. He met her eyes. "Then I'll do what I have to do to protect my children." The unspoken words hung between them. He would fight, He would die if necessary to defend the 3 small lives hidden in the dark earth outside. In that moment she saw the truth of him. He was not a captor. He was a father, a protector. The same fierce instinct that drove her own father across the harsh plains was burning in this lonely man's eyes. And then they saw it, a faint dust cloud on the eastern rim of the world, growing larger with each passing second. It was not the lazy plume of a lone rider. It was the dust of many horses, ridden hard and fast. The storm Tala had predicted was about to break. The dust cloud resolved into riders, at least 20 of them, maybe more. They moved with a fluid, terrifying purpose, spreading out as they approached the ranch, forming a wide, encircling crescent. They were magnificent and terrible, their faces painted for war, their hair adorned with feathers that whipped in the wind of their passage. At their head rode a man of immense presence, his stern face a mask of grief and fury. He carried a long, feather-adorned lance, and his eyes, even from this distance, seemed to burn with an all-consuming fire. "My father," Tala breathed, her hand going to her chest. "Not, Ani." Jed's knuckles were white where he gripped his rifle. He could feel the thunder of their hooves through the floorboards of the cabin. They didn't slow, didn't stop to hail the house. They were a force of nature, an avalanche of righteous anger set to sweep away everything in its path. They came to a halt 100 yards from the cabin, a silent, menacing ring of armed men. The silence that followed was heavier and more frightening than the charge had been. Nataini urged his horse forward a few paces, his dark eyes fixed on the small log house. "This is not good," Jed muttered, his heart pounding against his ribs. "They're not here to talk." "Open the door," Tala said, her voice firm. Verth said, "Why?" "They must see me. They must see that I'm not harmed. It is the only way." Jed hesitated. Opening that door felt like suicide, but looking at Tala's face, at the resolute set of her jaw, he knew she was right. It was a slim chance, but it was the only one they had. He moved to the door and slowly, deliberately, lifted the heavy bar. The wood groaned in protest. He pulled the door inward, just a crack at first, then wider, stepping back into the shadows of the room. Tala walked to the threshold and stepped out onto the porch, into the full glare of the morning sun. She stood there, her head held high, her black hair catching the light, a lone figure of defiance against the backdrop of the armed warriors. A collective gasp seemed to run through the line of riders. They had found her. Nadarani's face, which had been a mask of stone, cracked with a wave of emotion. Relief followed instantly by an even deeper rage. He saw his daughter, alive, emerging from the home of a white man. His mind, steeped in a lifetime of betrayal and broken treaties, could only leap to one conclusion. He raised his lance and shouted a single guttural word in his own tongue, a command. Tala shouted back, her voice clear and strong, a string of urgent dying words. Jed couldn't understand them, but he could hear the desperation, the plea for reason. Her father was not listening. He shouted again, pointing his lance at the house, at the shadowed doorway where Jed stood. He saw a kidnapper, a defiler. He saw an enemy who had to be erased. Tala took a step forward, her hands outstretched in a gesture of peace. "Hozo," she cried, a plea for peace and balance. "Shita, father, listen to me." But it was too late. An arrow loosed from the far side of the ring hissed through the air. It was not aimed to kill, but to warn. It thudded into the log wall just inches from the doorway, the feathered shaft quivering. Jed reacted on pure instinct. He lunged forward, grabbed Tala by the arm, and yanked her back inside, slamming the heavy door shut and dropping the bar back into place just as a second arrow struck the wood with a solid thump. The cabin was plunged back into dimness. Tala stumbled against him, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The chance for a peaceful explanation had vanished. The first arrow had been fired. The war party had laid siege to his ranch. Outside, a chilling, rhythmic chanting began. The sound of dozens of male voices joined in a war song that seeped through the log walls, a promise of the violence to come. "They will not listen," Tala whispered, her face pale. She leaned against the door, her eyes closed. "He is blinded by his fear for me." Jed moved back to the window, peering through a small crack between the logs. The warriors had dismounted. Some were taking up positions behind the sparse cover of rocks and junipers. Others were checking their bows, their rifles. They were settling in. They were not leaving. His mind raced. He had enough food and water for a few days, especially with the children in the cellar. He had ammunition, but he was one man with one woman and 3 children against a score of determined warriors. The math was simple, it was brutal, and it was not on his side. He looked at Tala. The regal princess was gone, replaced by a daughter whose heart was breaking. "There has to be a way," he said, more to himself than to her. She looked up, a new fire in her eyes, the fire of a cornered animal. "Yes," she said. "We survive the day, and then the night. We show them we will not break. We show them they cannot take me back by force. Then perhaps my father will be forced to listen." It was a desperate plan, a prayer against a hurricane. But as Jed looked out at the ring of warriors surrounding his home, he knew it was the only plan they had. The uneasy alliance formed in the canyon had been forged in fire. He was no longer just a man who had helped a stranger. He was a defender, a guardian, and he had made a silent, solemn promise to see this through, no matter the cost. The sun climbed higher in the sky, beating down on the small ranch. Inside the cabin, the air grew thick with heat and tension. Jed and Tala moved like ghosts, speaking in whispers, their senses stretched taut. Every scrape of a boot, every creak of the floorboards sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. Jed stationed himself at the front window, the one that gave the clearest view of Natania and the main body of his warrior. Tala took the smaller window at the back, which overlooked the creek bed and the path to the root cellar. They had to watch all sides. "They're not moving," Jed reported, his voice low. "They're just watching, waiting. They believe time is on their post. They believe time is on their side. They think you will run out of water, out of courage." A sharp crack split the air and wood splintered near Jed's head. He ducked instinctively. A bullet had torn through the log wall, leaving a smoking hole. It was a message. "We can reach you whenever we want." Jed's jaw tightened. He peered through the chink in the logs. He could see the puff of smoke from a rifleman positioned behind a rocky outcrop. They were testing his defenses, trying to rattle him. "They have rifles," he said grimly, "not just bows." "Trade for them," Tala said. "My people are not fools. They know the tools of their enemies." The day wore on, a slow torture of waiting. The heat was relentless. Jed's throat was dry, but he refused to touch the water canteen. That was for the children. He thought of them, huddled in the cool, damp darkness of the cellar. He prayed Caleb was keeping them calm, that Leo wasn't too frightened. The thought of their fear was a physical pain, sharper than any bullet. Late in the afternoon, Tala spoke. "I need to check on them." Jed shook his head. "No. It's too dangerous. They'll see you." "The back of the house is shielded by the barn," she argued. "The creek bed offers cover. I will be fast. They need to know we are still here. They need to see a friendly face." She looked at him, her eyes pleading. "They are your children, Jedediah, but they are alone in the dark. I cannot let them be afraid." He saw the truth in her words. The children's morale was as important as their own. He looked out his window, gauging the positions of the warriors. Most of the attention was focused on the front of the cabin. The back was less guarded. It was a risk. A terrible risk. But she was right. "All right," he said, his voice tight with anxiety. "But you take this." He unbuckled his Colt and handed it to her, but first. She looked at the heavy pistol, then back at him, her eyes wide. "Do you know how to use it?" he asked. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I have seen them used. You don't aim, you point, and you don't pull the trigger, you squeeze it. Only use it if you have no other choice. The sound will bring them all running." "I understand." She tucked the pistol into the waistband of her dress. "Cover me." Jed moved to the back window, his Winchester ready. "Go, now." Tala slipped out the back door, silent as a shadow. She didn't run, but moved in a low crouch, using the water trough in the corner of the barn as cover. She was a phantom against the earth, her movements economical and sure. Jed held his breath, his rifle tracking her progress, his finger light on the trigger. He scanned the ridgeline, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. She reached the heavy cellar doors, slid the outer bolt free, and lifted one just enough to slip inside. The door closed behind her, and she was gone. The minutes that followed were the longest of Jed's life. He was completely blind, his imagination filling the silence with horrors. Had they seen her? Was a warrior creeping up on the cellar right now? He fought the urge to run out there himself. Then the door creaked open again. Tala emerged, moving with the same speed and grace. She slid the bolt back in place and made her way back to the house. She slipped back inside, barring the door behind her. She was breathing hard, her face slick with sweat, but she was safe. She leaned against the wall, handing the colt back to him. "They are well," she panted. "Caleb is strong. Sarah is singing to Leo. I gave them water. I told them their father was a great warrior fighting to protect them." Jed's throat felt thick. He had to swallow twice before he could speak. "Thank you, Tala." In that moment, she was not a Navajo princess, and he was not a lonely white rancher. They were two people in a desperate fight, bound by the shared duty of protecting 3 innocent lives. The trust between them, fragile as a desert flower, had just put down its first real roots in the blood-red soil of the siege. As dusk settled, the nature of the assault changed. The war chants began again, louder this time, more insistent. Firelight flickered from the warriors' positions, casting long, dancing shadows that made the familiar landscape seem alien and threatening. They were using the darkness, trying to break their spirit with noise and fear. Inside, Jed lit a single lantern, keeping it low on the floor to make it harder for the riflemen to get a target. A small pool of light cast their faces in stark relief. "They will try to get closer under the cover of night," Jed said, his voice a low rumble. "They will try to set fire to the house," Tala added, her gaze on the thatched roof of the barn, dry as tinder. "The barn first, to draw you out." He nodded. It was a classic tactic: create a crisis, a distraction, and exploit the chaos. "We need to douse any flames before they can take hold." He pointed to the 2 large water barrels he kept by the door for just such an emergency. They were full. It was their only real defense against fire. The hours crept by. The chanting outside rose and fell, a constant, unnerving pressure. Sometime after midnight, a flicker of movement near the barn caught Jed's eye. A lone figure, crawling on his belly, a torch in his hand. "There," Jed whispered, pointing. "The barn." Tala saw it too. "He is almost there." Jed raised his Winchester, settling the stock against his shoulder, his eye aligning with the sight. He could end it right there. One shot, one less warrior, but a cold dread filled him. If he shed the first blood, there would be no turning back. It would become a fight to the death. Nyane's rage would be cemented, his grief given a target. There would be no more chances for words. "I can't," he breathed, lowering the rifle. "If I kill one of them, they'll kill us all. They'll kill my children." Tala looked at him, her expression a mixture of surprise and something else. Respect. She had expected the white man to shoot. It was their way. But Jedediah Stone was different. "Then we must stop him another way," she said. She looked around the cabin, her eyes falling on a stack of spare horseshoes by the hearth. She picked one up. It was heavy, solid iron. "Your arm is stronger than mine." Jed understood immediately. He took the horseshoe. It felt heavy and awkward in his hand. He wasn't a throwing man, but he had to try. He moved to the small window on the side of the house, the one closest to the barn. He could just see the warrior reaching the corner of the structure, preparing to touch the torch to the dry wood. Jed took a deep breath, judged the distance, and hurled the horseshoe with all his might. It sailed through the air in a dark arc, not with the grace of an arrow, but with the brute force of a thrown rock. It struck the warrior in the shoulder with a sickening thud. The man cried out in pain and surprise, dropping the torch. The small flame sputtered and died in the dust. The warrior scrambled back into the darkness, clutching his injured arm. A volley of shouts erupted from the Navajo line. They were confused, startled. They had expected a gunshot, not a silent, unseen blow from the darkness. Jed sagged against the wall, his own arm aching from the effort, and it worked. They had defended the barn without firing a shot. Tala came to his side, a small smile touching her lips for the first time. "A warrior does not always need a weapon," she said softly. "Sometimes he only needs his courage." He looked at her in the dim lantern light. Her face, so often a mask of proud defiance, was open and genuine. The shared danger, the small victory, had stripped away the barriers between them. "My father, he taught me that a man's worth is not in how he fights, but in what he fights for," Jed said, his voice hoarse. He thought of his own father, a stern but fair man who had carved this ranch from the wilderness. "Right now, all I'm fighting for is the morning. Then we will fight for it together," Tala replied. And as the war chants outside resumed, a little less certain this time, a fragile bond was being forged inside the besieged cabin. A bond built not on promises or words, but on a shared will to survive and a mutual respect that was beginning to feel a lot like hope. Dawn broke on the second day of the siege. The cabin was hot and smelled of stale air and fear. Jed's eyes were gritty from lack of sleep, and a dull ache had settled deep in his bones. He and Tala had taken turns watching through the night, but neither had truly rested. The war party was still there, a ring of silent sentinels. The failed fire attempt seemed to have given them pause. There was no chanting this morning, only an unnerving stillness. "Talis, deciding what to do next," Tala said, her voice strained. The blow to the warrior's shoulder, it was not from a gun. It has made them question. "Question what?" Jed asked, rubbing his tired face. "Question you," she replied. "A kidnapper would have shot him. A guilty man would have killed him. You did not. You disabled him. It is the way of a warrior defending his home, not a thief defending his prize." A flicker of hope ignited in Jed's chest. "You think your father sees that?" "My father sees what he wants to see," she said sadly. "But the others? They will be talking. They will be wondering." The immediate problem was water. The barrels were still mostly full, but the canteen he'd left in the root cellar would be running low. The children couldn't stay down there forever. "I have to get more water to them," Jed said, his voice firm, "and check on them." "I will go," Tala offered immediately. "No," Jed countered. "You went yesterday. It's my turn. They're my children. It's my risk to take." He wouldn't be argued with. He waited until the sun was high, when the heat would make the warriors sluggish and the glare would make it harder to see. He took the canteen and prepared to make the same desperate dash Tala had made the day before. "Be safe, Jedediah," she whispered as he unbarred the back door. Her use of his full name felt intimate, a prayer. He slipped out, his body low to the ground, his heart hammering. The short distance to the cellar doors seemed like a mile. The sun was a physical weight on his back. He could feel the eyes of the warriors on him, even if he couldn't see them. He reached the cellar, his breath catching in his throat. He worked the bolt, lifted the door, and dropped inside, pulling it shut above him. The darkness was cool and smelled of damp earth. 3 pairs of eyes blinked at him in the gloom. "Pa!" Sarah's voice was a tremulous whisper. She threw her arms around his legs. Little Leo started to cry, a mixture of relief and fear. Caleb stood his ground, trying to be brave, but Jed could see the relief washing over his young face. "We were scared, Pa. We heard a noise last night." "I know, son. Everything's all right," Jed soothed, hugging Sarah tight. He knelt and pulled Leo into his arms, rocking him gently. "I'm proud of you, Caleb. You've done good. You've kept them safe." He refilled their water, gave them the last of the bread, and spoke to them in a low, reassuring voice. He told them they were being brave, that this would be over soon. He didn't know if it was true, but they needed to believe it. As he held Leo, the little boy's head resting on his shoulder, Jed's gaze fell on a small, carved wooden horse clutched in his son's hand. It was a simple toy, whittled from a piece of scrap pine. Martha had made it for him, just before she got sick. An idea sparked in his mind. A desperate, crazy idea. It was a long shot, but it was better than just waiting for the inevitable. He hugged his children one last time. "I have to go now. Stay strong. I love you all." He slid back out of the cellar, the small wooden horse clutched in his hand. Instead of running straight back to the cabin, he took a different route. Staying low, using the barn as a shield, he crept toward the creek bed. Tala watched from the window, her heart in her throat. What was he doing? He wasn't coming back. Jed reached the edge of the creek, which was mostly dry sand and smooth, sun-bleached stones. He could see his own footprints from yesterday, and Tala's. He could also see the tracks of a single warrior who had crept close during the night. He placed the small wooden horse on a prominent flat rock in the middle of the creek bed, where it would be clearly visible. It was a child's toy, a symbol. Then he scurried back to the safety of the cabin, his lungs burning, his back expecting an arrow at any moment. He slammed the door and barred it, leaning against it, panting. "What was that?" Tala demanded, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. "What did you do?" "I left them a message," Jed gasped, pointing toward the creek. "Something else for them to question." Tala peered through the back window. She saw the small, lonely toy sitting on the rock. A child's horse, a symbol of innocence. A thing that had no place in a battle. It was a message that no arrow or bullet could carry. It said, "There are children here." She looked at Jed, at the fierce protective love that drove him, and understood. He was not just fighting with weapons, he was fighting with his heart, and it was a battle her people, who cherished their children above all else, might just understand. The placement of the toy horse had a profound, if subtle, effect on the siege. The warriors did not pack up and leave, but the atmosphere changed. The relentless, aggressive pressure lessened. There were no more probing shots, no more attempts to breach their defenses. There was only watching, and, Jed suspected, talking. Inside the cabin, a different kind of bond was forming. The shared ordeal was stripping away their differences, leaving only their common humanity. They talked in the quiet hours, filling the tense silence with pieces of their lives. Jed spoke of Martha, his voice thick with a grief that was still raw. He described her smile, the way she could make wild flowers grow in the unforgiven soil, the color of the quilt she was making for Leo when the fever took her. He spoke of his loneliness, a vast, empty space that his children, as much as he loved them, could not entirely fill. Tala listened, her dark eyes full of a deep, sorrowful understanding. And then she spoke of her own life. She was not a princess in the way Jed's books described kings and queens. She was the daughter of a great leader, a woman of high standing, destined for a marriage that would strengthen her clan. But she was also a dreamer, a woman with a spirit as wild as the land she called home. "The men who took me," she said, her voice low and steady, "they were not warriors. They were prospectors, the same ones you chased away. They had been trying to force my people to reveal the location of a sacred place, a canyon where the ancestors left their marks on the walls, a place they believed held silver. They thought by taking you they could force your father's hand," Jed surmised. She nodded. "I was on a journey of solitude, a time of prayer and reflection before my arranged marriage. They ambushed me. I fought, but there were too many." Her hands clenched into fists at the memory. To be bound, to be helpless, it is a feeling I will never forget. Jed saw the shame and fury warring in her eyes. "You were not helpless, Tala. You were defiant. I saw it. It's the first thing I saw." His words seemed to soothe a hidden wound. She looked at him, and for a moment the besieged cabin faded away, and it was just the two of them, a man and a woman who had seen the darkness in each other's pasts. "And your children?" she asked softly, changing the subject. "Tell me of them." Jed's face softened. He spoke of Caleb's earnest sense of responsibility, how he tried so hard to be the man of the house. He described Sarah's bright, curious spirit, her love for animals and stories. And he spoke of Leo, the little boy who carried the memory of his mother in his round, cheerful face. "Delivery are good children," he finished, his voice full of pride. "They deserve more than this. They deserve a life without fear." "All children do," Tala said quietly. Her gaze drifted to the window, to the land outside that was both his home and hers, a land that was now a battleground. A comfortable silence fell between them. It was no longer the strained silence of strangers, but the easy quiet of companions. They had found a small island of peace in the middle of a war. Later that afternoon, as Tala was cleaning the barrel of the Colt with a practiced efficiency that surprised Jed, she paused. "The toy horse," she said. "It was a wise move. My people hold children sacred. To harm a home where a child's toy lays in plain sight is a great dishonor. You have put the burden of honor back on my father." "I was just thinking of my son," Jed said simply. "I know," she replied, her eyes meeting his. "That is why it was wise." The compliment, coming from her, warmed him more than the fire ever could. He was just a simple rancher, trying to get by, but in Tala's eyes he saw a reflection of a man he hadn't felt like in years. A man of strength, of courage, a man worthy of respect. And as he looked back at her, at the proud line of her jaw and the deep intelligence in her eyes, he realized he felt the same way about her. She was more than a victim he had rescued. She was a warrior in her own right, with a spirit as strong and unyielding as the ancient mesas. On the morning of the third day, something changed. A single rider detached himself from the main group and approached the cabin, a long branch of juniper held aloft. He stopped, well out of rifle range. "It's a sign of parley," Tala said, her voice tight with a mixture of hope and dread. "They wish to talk." "About time," Jed muttered. He watched as the rider dismounted, planted the juniper branch in the ground, and retreated back to the line. The invitation was clear. "I have to go out there," Jed said. "No," Tala said, her hand gripping his arm. "It could be a trap. They could mean to lure you out. It's a risk I have to take. We can't outlast them, Tala. Our water is low, our food is almost gone. Talk is all we have left." He looked at her, his gaze steady. "But I won't go alone. They need to see us together. They need to see you are here by choice." She saw the grim determination in his face and knew he was right. It was a terrifying gamble, but it was their only move. "I will come." Jed unbarred the door. The sunlight that streamed in was blinding. They stepped out onto the porch together, blinking in the sudden brightness. Jed was unarmed, his hands held open at his sides to show he meant no harm. Tala stood beside him, her posture regal, her face unreadable. Across the 100 yards of sun-scorched earth, Naatni watched them. He nudged his horse forward, alone, until he was halfway between his warriors and the cabin. He stopped, a towering figure of paternal authority and contained rage. "Stay here," Jed said to Tala in a low voice. "Let me approach first." He walked forward, his boots stirring up little puffs of red dust. The silence was absolute. He could feel the eyes of 20 warriors on his back. His heart pounded a slow, heavy rhythm. He stopped about 20 feet from the Navajo chief. For a long moment, neither man spoke. They simply appraised each other across the divide of culture and conflict. Natani saw the face of an enemy, the Biligana who had broken so many promises. "You have my daughter," Nataini said, his voice a low growl, his English heavily accented but clear. "Your daughter is safe," Jed replied, his own voice steady. "She is a guest in my home. I saved her from men who would have done her great harm." Nadia's lip curled in a sneer. "The white man's words are like wind in the grass. They make noise but mean nothing. You hold her against her will?" "No," Jed said firmly, "that is not true." "Then let her speak," the chief commanded, his voice booming across the clearing. "Let her walk to me now if she is free to do so." This was the moment. Jed turned and looked back at the porch. Tala stood there, a still, proud figure against the dark wood of the cabin. Their eyes met. The future of everyone on this small patch of land rested on her shoulders. With a grace and deliberation that was breathtaking, Tala descended the porch steps. She did not run to her father. She did not hurry. She walked, her head held high, across the dusty ground that separated them. She stopped beside Jed, placing herself between the two men, a bridge between two worlds. She turned to her father and spoke in the flowing melodic tongue of the Dine. Her voice was not the voice of a captive, but of a leader. It was strong, clear, and full of authority. She spoke for a long time, her hands gesturing, first to Jed, then to the cabin where the children were hidden, then to the toy horse still sitting on the rock in the creek bed. Jed could not understand the words, but he could read the story on Nataini's face. The chief's stony expression began to crumble. The certainty in his eyes was replaced by confusion, then doubt. He looked from his daughter to Jed, and for the first time, he seemed to truly see the man before him, not as a symbol of his enemies, but as an individual. When Tala finished speaking, a heavy silence fell once more. Naani's gaze was fixed on Jed. "She tells a story of prospectors," the chief said, his voice softer now, the hard edge of rage gone, "of a whip, of a rescue. It's the true story," Jed said. "She says you fought for her without firing your gun," Naani continued, his eyes searching Jed. "She says you protected my grandchildren, though they are not your blood." He gestured to the toy horse. "She says you fight with honor. I fought to protect my family, and to protect your daughter, who was in my care. It is what any honorable man would do." Nadiani considered this, his brow furrowed in deep thought. The seeds of doubt Tala had planted were beginning to sprout, but a lifetime of distrust was a hard thing to overcome. The siege was not over yet. It was merely paused. Just as a fragile understanding seemed within reach, a new threat appeared on the horizon. From the south, the direction from which Jed had first come, 2 riders appeared. They were not Navajo. They were the prospectors, Silas and his hulking companion. And this time, they weren't on foot. They were mounted, and they were not alone. 3 other men, hard-faced and heavily armed, rode with them. They reined in their horses a short distance away, their faces a mixture of confusion and malevolent glee at the scene before them. "Well, well, Silas," the big man boomed, a nasty grin splitting his beard. "Looks like the cavalry showed up, just not for the right side." Silas's venomous eyes fixed on Jed, then on Tala. "That's him. That's the rancher who stole our prize. And there she is, the little princess." He turned to the other men. That chief will pay a handsome price to get his daughter back. We just got to get through him." He pointed a grimy finger at Jed. Notney's face darkened. He looked from the newcomers to Jed, his suspicion instantly rekindled. Had this all been a trick, a rendezvous? "These are the men," Tala said, her voice sharp and clear, speaking in English for all to hear. "Father, these are the men who captured me, the ones with the whip." The war party, which had been relaxed, now tensed. Bows were raised, rifles cocked. They shifted their attention from the cabin to the 5 newcomers. Jed saw the fragile truth shattering. He saw the doubt returning to Nadine's eyes. He had to act. "This is my land," Jed said, his voice ringing with authority. He took a step forward, placing himself in front of Tala. "And this is a dispute between me and the Dine. You have no business here. Ride on." Silas laughed, a high, ugly sound. "We ain't going nowhere without the girl. She's our property." He raised his rifle, aiming it squarely at Jed's chest. "Now, step aside, rancher." Before Jed could react, an arrow, swift and silent as death, flew from the Navajo line. It struck Silas's rifle, shattering the wooden stock and sending the weapon clattering to the ground. Silas yelped, staring at his tingling, numb hand. It was Nadine's who had fired. His face was a mask of cold fury. He had seen the truth in that single, vile statement, "our property." He knew with absolute certainty that his daughter had been right. These men were the enemy, not the rancher. "You will not touch my daughter," Natani declared, his voice thundering with the power of a chief defending his blood. "You will not set foot on this land." The hulking prospector, his face red with rage, drew his pistol. "The hell we won't," he fired. But he wasn't aiming for the chief. He was aiming for Jed, for the man who had started it all. Tala screamed. "Jedediah!" Time seemed to slow. Jed saw the flash from the pistol's muzzle. He braced for the impact, but in that split second Tala moved. She shoved him hard, pushing him out of the bullet's path. The shot went wide, kicking up dust behind him. And then, all hell broke loose. The Navajo war party surged forward, a wave of righteous fury. Arrows filled the air, gunshots cracked from both sides. It was no longer a siege, it was a pitched battle. Jed, shoved to the ground, rolled and came up with the Colt he'd retrieved from the cabin before coming out. He didn't fire into the melee. He scanned for the leader. Silas, his rifle broken, was trying to flee. The other 3 were firing wildly into the advancing warriors. But Jed's eyes were on the big man, the one who had fired at him, who now had his pistol aimed at a dismounted Nahana'i. The chief was focused on another of the men, his lance at the ready. Jed didn't hesitate. He raised the Colt, took aim, and squeezed the trigger. The pistol bucked in his hand. The big prospector grunted, a look of surprise on his face. He clutched his shoulder, the same spot where Jed had thrown the horseshoe, and his pistol fell from his grasp. Jed had aimed to wound, not to kill. The battle was short and brutal. The 5 prospectors, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, stood no chance against the disciplined fury of the war party. Within minutes, it was over. 2 of the prospectors lay dead. The other 3, including Silas and the wounded brute, were captured, their hands bound. Silence fell once more, thick with the smell of gunpowder and blood. In the aftermath of the battle, the world seemed to hold its breath. The Navajo warriors stood over their captives, their faces grim. Jed stood, his pistol still smoking, his heart pounding. Nadine walked over to him. The chief's face was no longer filled with suspicion, but with a deep, profound respect. He stopped before Jed and looked at the Colt in his hand, then at the wounded prospector who was being guarded by 2 warriors. "You did not kill him," Nadine stated. It wasn't a question. "He was no longer a threat," Jed said, his voice hoarse. The chief nodded slowly. He looked at Tala, who was standing beside Jed, her hand resting lightly on his arm, a silent gesture of support and possession. He saw the way she looked at the rancher and the way the rancher looked at her. He saw the truth, clearer than the morning sun. "My daughter spoke the truth," Nadine said, his voice full of a weary sorrow. "My heart was clouded by fear and I could not see it. I owe you an apology, Jedediah Stone." "No apology is necessary," Jed said. "You were a father, protecting your child. I understand that better than anything." Nadine then did something that stunned every warrior present. He reached out and placed his hand on Jed's shoulder, a gesture of profound respect and kinship. "You have the heart of a Din warrior. You fight with honor, and you protect those in your care. You have earned my respect." He then turned to his daughter. He spoke to her in their tongue, his voice soft now, full of love and relief. She replied, her voice equally soft. She had watched them, feeling like an outsider again, but a welcome one. Finally, Nadiani turned back to Jed. "These men," he said, gesturing to the captives, "will face our justice. They will not trouble your lands again." He paused, his gaze intense. "And my daughter, she is free to choose her own path. Her arranged marriage is no more. Her spirit is too strong to be caged by tradition." His eyes flickered between Tala and Jed, a silent understanding passing between the two men. He was giving his blessing. As the Navajo began to prepare to leave, taking their prisoners and their fallen with them, the doors to the root cellar creaked open. Caleb, Sarah, and Leo emerged. Blinking in the bright sunlight, their faces smudged with dirt and confusion. They saw the warriors, the horses, and their father standing tall and safe, and they ran to him. "I!" they cried, throwing their arms around his legs. Jed knelt and gathered them into a fierce hug, burying his face in their hair, overwhelmed with relief. Tala watched, a gentle smile on her face. She knelt down beside them. Sarah, no longer afraid, looked at her with wide, curious eyes. Leo, emboldened, reached out a chubby hand and touched the beautiful woven pattern on her dress. Tala looked up and met Jed's eyes over the heads of his children. In that moment, surrounded by the chaos and the aftermath of battle, they found a point of perfect stillness. A future that had seemed impossible just hours before now stretched out before them, bright and full of promise. The war party that had surrounded his ranch was leaving, but the Navajo princess they had come for was staying, not as a captive, not as a guest, but as something more, something new, something like family. The last of the warriors disappeared over the eastern ridge, leaving a profound silence in their wake. The dust settled back onto the land. The siege was over. Jed stood on his porch, his 3 children clustered around him, their small hands clutching his shirt and trousers, as if to assure themselves he was real. He watched the last of the dust fade, his heart a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Tala came to stand beside him. She had washed her face in the basin, and in the clean late afternoon light she looked less like a survivor and more like the proud, beautiful woman she was. "They are gone," she said softly. "Yes," Jed replied. He looked down at his children, then at her. The space on the porch, which had once felt so empty after Martha's passing, now felt full. "Thank you, Tala, for everything, for saving my life." "You saved mine first," she said, her dark eyes serious. "We are even," but they both knew it was more than that. The debt between them had been paid and repaid, transformed into a bond that neither of them had expected. Caleb, ever practical, broke the spell. "Pa, are we safe now?" Jed put a hand on his son's head. "Yes, son, we're safe now." Sarah looked up at Tala. "Are you leaving too?" she asked, her voice small. Tala knelt down to be at eye level with the little girl. "I do not have to leave right away," she said gently. "Would you like me to stay for a while?" Sarah's face broke into a wide, gap-toothed grin, and she nodded enthusiastically, wrapping her arms around Tala's neck in a spontaneous hug. Tala, startled at first, returned the embrace, a look of profound tenderness on her face. Over the next few days, a new routine settled over the ranch. It was a routine of healing. Jed worked to repair the bullet holes in his cabin walls, replacing the splintered logs. Tala, surprisingly, proved to have a gentle, knowing way with the livestock, calming the spooked chickens and helping Jed mend a fence near the creek. She taught Sarah how to weave intricate patterns with blades of grass and showed Caleb how to read the tracks of desert animals. She would sit with Leo on the porch, telling him stories of the coyote and the crow in her low, melodic voice. She was bringing life and color back into their world. Jed found himself watching her constantly. He watched the way the sun caught the blue-black sheen of her hair, the way she moved with such purpose and grace, the way she laughed when Leo did something funny. The lonely, hollow place in his heart began to feel less empty. One evening, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch together, watching the stars emerge in the vast velvet sky. "My father will be wondering when I will return," Tala said, breaking the comfortable silence. Jed's heart clenched. He had known this moment was coming, but he wasn't ready for it. "Do you want to go back?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. She was quiet for a long time, her gaze on the distant, sacred mountains of her people. My home is there, she said. My family, my history. But, she turned to look at him, her eyes luminous in the starlight. My heart is no longer certain where it belongs. He found the courage to speak the truth that had been growing inside him. Mine is, he said, his voice barely a whisper. It's right here, Tala, with you. He reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were slender but strong, and they curled around his. It was not a desperate grasp, but a confident, certain connection. Jedediah, she said, and the way she spoke his name was a song. This ranch is a lonely place. It was, he corrected her gently. It hasn't been lonely since the day you arrived. She smiled, a true, radiant smile that lit up the darkness. My father said I am free to choose my own path. I think my path has led me here, to a lonely rancher with 3 beautiful children. Jed's calloused hand tightened on hers. He looked at their intertwined fingers, his skin weathered and pale, hers smooth and copper. And he saw not a division but a bridge between 2 people, 2 cultures, 2 lonely souls who had found each other in the midst of a war. The war party was gone, the threat had passed, but the Navajo princess had not been taken. She had been freed, not just from her captors, but into a new life. And the lonely rancher was no longer alone. He had found his home again, not in the logs and dust of his ranch, but in the brave, proud heart of the woman sitting beside him.